Hello everyone, welcome to the 9th video in this Learn C# series, and today we're going to be covering null operators. If you haven't been following this series, I have to learn C# for my upcoming internship this summer, and I find the best way of learning is actually through teaching. So I've been following C# 12 in a nutshell over on O'Reilly Media and presenting some of the concepts that are in that book over here on YouTube, so hopefully we both can gain something from that. With that out of the way, let's get right into the motivation for using null operators in C#. In a previous video, I mentioned one of the biggest differences between a reference type and a value type is that reference types can be null. Let's set this up with more of a demonstration though. So we can have a string s and we can assign that equal to Colton, my name, right? And we can do a simple print statement, so doing a console.writeLine, and we can print the contents of s out. Again, we get Colton. So that sounds all fine, and we can also just assign s equal to null, because remember, strings are reference types, and we get null sent back to us. But an issue occurs when we try to access the properties of a null reference. So if I were to do s.length in this console.writeLine method, and let's go ahead and take this out real quick and make sure that this isn't going to get ran. So we'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll get 6 printed out to us, which we do. But as soon as we set s equal to null, there is no length property. It no longer exists. And so we're actually going to get a program error. In fact, it's a null reference exception. Same thing goes for when we have our own custom object. So let's go ahead and take this out, and let's make a new cat. So we'll say cat C is equal to a new cat with the name of my cat, which is Mochi. And so we can go in and we can say print C, which that's fine. So we get a cat with the property of Mochi. We can even go into its name property and get its length. So we can do c.name.length, and we're going to get the length of Mochi, which is 5. That's all fine and dandy. But again, we can set C equal to null. Once again, can also do just printing out C, which we would get null. But as soon as we try to access the name property of this cat, we're going to get a null reference exception. So again, that is the big issue when we work with reference types, is that they can have nulls, which can cause our system to crash. In the olden days, when null operators were not a thing, programmers would have to do something like this. If C is not null, then we'll run some sort of methodology here, so we can actually take this console.writeLine and stick it right here. And then else, if C is not null, we can say, I don't know, for fun, we can just do a console.writeLine saying C was null, and then we can handle that in some other way. So again, we go to print this, we're going to get a C was null. This is pretty painstaking. If we have to write an if statement for everything that we do when we're working with a reference that can be potentially null, that causes a lot of lines to be written that are just kind of unnecessary. This is just verbose, and instead we have null operators. Long gone are the days where we need to do this exhaustive if-else statements to check if a reference type is null and then do some error handling with it. So let's demonstrate how the null coalescing operator, which is just a double question mark, helps us in this situation. And instead, we don't want to use a cat object here. And instead, let's just revert back to the strings that we were using earlier. So if I have a string s that's set equal to Colton, and then we immediately set s equal to null, we're gonna come up with some issues here. So let's go ahead and put in the console.writeLine here again, print s just to make sure that we're getting a null back, which we do. And so here's where the null coalescing operator kind of saves us here. What we can do is after s, we can do a double question mark, and then anything to the right of it is going to be some sort of default value that we're going to provide. So here I'll just say default. How this reads is kind of similar to a ternary operator, if you've ever ran into those, or ternary conditions. So we evaluate this statement and say s is potentially null. What is to the left of the null coalescing operator is null, then we're going to return this instead. So we would just return default. And so this console.writeLine would say default. But if whatever is to the left of the null coalescing operator is not null, meaning that it actually exists, then we'll go ahead and just go with s. We'll go ahead and print whatever the contents of s is. So let's go ahead and run this and we'll get default, and that's what we see here. But as soon as we go ahead and comment out this s equals null line, we're instead going to get s, which is Colton. So again, one more reiteration of how the null coalescing operator works is that whatever is to the left of it, if it's null, then we print whatever is to the right of it. And it doesn't have to necessarily be printing, it can be like an assignment, stuff like that. But if it's not null, whatever to the left isn't null, then we go ahead and go with that value. The null coalescing assignment operator is very similar to just what the null coalescing operator does. And so here's a great example of it. We have the string s, which is set equal to Colton, and then we immediately set it to null. But what if we wanted to set s to some other value? Though it's a very simple example, it demonstrates exactly what's going on with the null coalescing assignment operator here. So we say, I want s to be equal to s, I want it to remain as is as long as it's not null. But if it is null, we're going to assign it to something else. So again, the thing to the left of the null coalescing operator is null, so we're going to return whatever is to the right of it. So let's make sure that we're getting something else here, which is what gets printed out. But this is a little bit verbose, and we can actually condense it a little bit. So just like your plus equals operators and the minus equals that you might have in other languages like Java and stuff, we can do the same thing with this null coalescing assignment operator. So instead of having s is equal to s or something else, we can instead condense that and take this double quote or double question mark here and immediately paste it right here, and there we go. So s will be conditionally equal to something else as long as s is null. So let's go ahead and see what happens here. We get something else again because s was null. Let's go ahead and take out this line right here, comment it out. So now s is Colton. It remains Colton on line 6 because that's commented out. And so now we're going to say, okay, the contents of s will be equal to something else if s is null. But again, s is not null, so when we go to run this again, we're going to get Colton instead. That's exactly what we get. I hope that is a fairly decent example of how the null coalescing assignment operator is. It's just saying if this is null, then we can assign it to this value. Our last null operator is the null conditional operator. This works very similar to what the dot operator is, which the dot operator is just accessing a field or a method of a certain object, and instead is recognizing that this object or the reference can be null, and so we can conditionally call that method or access that field. So let's not use strings in this case, and let's use this cat class that I've created down below. So every cat that we're going to make is going to have a name field that is of type string, and it has a constructor that takes in a name. It just assigns the name given whatever was up in the arguments. And then lastly, we have one method to run here for a cat instance, which is going to return to us a string. It's called speak, and all it does is just return meow to us. So let's go up here and let's create our new cat. So we're going to do a cat c is equal to a new cat, and we're going to name it my cat's name, so Mochi. And it's not new cat, it's just new cat. And so let's make sure that we can call c.speak on this and we get meow back. And so we do c.speak. Obviously that's not going to do anything because we return a string. We're not actually printing it out down there. So if we go to wrap this into a console.writeLine, so console.writeLine, and we do the c.speak here, we will now see meow get printed out to the screen, and we do, so that's great. But we can run into some issues if somehow c becomes null later on in the program. So let's go ahead and assign c to null right here. And if you remember before, we cannot access c's speak method because it's null. It's non-existent. So we're going to get a null reference exception as soon as we run this. Your first thought in fixing this might be to go ahead and just use the null operator that we had in the first one, and we could just do a question mark and say meow no matter what here. But that's not exactly how it works. Let's make sure that when we run it, we get the exception again. And here we go, we get the null reference exception. What happened here is that c is null. Again, we cannot access its speak method. It's not that meow is some sort of optional type to work with. It's not null. It's just that we can't get to that point because c itself is already null. We can't do anything with it. This is where the null conditional operator comes in and saves us. So we understand that c can be null. So instead what we can do is immediately append it with a question mark right here saying saying, hey, this is null and can cause an error. So if C is null, then don't run speak. We're going to actually short circuit and not run the speak method. And then later on, we can actually say, okay, since whatever to the left can be potentially null or it's not going to run, we're just going to print out some default string because that's what speak would be giving to us. And so we'll do a lowercase meow here and see what happens. And we do get that lowercase meow. So again, that's where we were using this null conditional operator right here, which I didn't mean to do like the double question mark. It's just a single question mark and a dot operator. Again, saying the reference to the left could be null. If it is null, don't run whatever's to the right. And instead, later on, we're going to have a null coalescing operator that will help us out here. These null operators can be applied in a various amounts of ways. You don't have to just specifically use them with a console.writeLine call. You can use this in, the assignments, other program logic. The sky's the limit really with these, and it's really to save your program from crashing when you encounter a missing value, pretty much. And that's it for the video. We covered the 3 ways we can handle nulls in our program. So the null coalescing operator, the null coalescing assignment operator, and then lastly, the null conditional operator. They all have their own special use cases, but again, at the end of the day, it's just to prevent your program from crashing. If you learned something today or from this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more content like this. Again, I have lots more C# to learn here, and every chance I get to learn some C#, I'm going to be uploading it here. So again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.